Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. How do we cultivate equanimity in everyday practices and everyday interactions with others? Fortunately, there's lots of ways, and this third podcast in our series will discuss the most important day-to-day things we can do to maintain composure in our troubling times. Now, the first two podcasts focused on more direct psychological strategies for equanimity. I recognise, of course, that in a strict sense, all strategies affect our psychology, but the focus in this podcast is on less direct, but nonetheless very practical strategies that lead to inner calm and composure. So we'll explore 4 types of practical action to generate equanimity. 1 is maintaining physical health and resilience. 2 is intentional information and media consumption. 3 is the active pursuit of purpose and experiences of awe. And 4 is prosocial action, compassion, gratitude, and civility. Let's start with physical health and resilience. What have they got to do with equanimity? Well, quite a lot, as we are biological creatures and we mediate the world physically. For example, there's a fundamental psychological process called state-dependent cognition. And what's that? It's the many ways that physiological states predispose us to certain mental states. For example, if you're tired or in pain or feeling nauseous and so on, your thinking will tend to be more negative. You'll attend to and ruminate on bad stuff in the world. It's as if the mind searches for bad stuff to explain one's bad feelings. It seeks to be congruent with how we feel. And unfortunately, there's always confirmatory negative material at hand. If you wake in the morning after a bad sleep, you'll be more likely to have pessimistic thoughts. You'll find things that justify or explain why you feel bad. And here's the kicker. Many of them will be true. But if you wake after a fabulous sleep, the world will appear as if through rose-coloured glasses. You'll tend to think about and pay more attention to things that make you happy. So, it's not only that thoughts can influence your physiology, but it's also that your physiology can influence your thoughts. So we ought to cultivate good feelings in the body to make it easier to experience equanimity. And generally speaking, physical well-being strengthens your psychological resilience, and in turn, psychological resilience helps protect and restore your physical health. The two are mutually reinforcing. And the holy triumvirate of resilience is good diet, sufficient exercise, and good sleep. And together they improve cognitive function and emotional regulation. How do they do this? Well, for example, regular physical activity increases the release of serotonin, which stabilises mood and increases positivity. It also increases dopamine release, which boosts motivation, reward, and drive. And finally, it releases more endorphins, which are natural painkillers and mood lifters. All these changes can then shift thought patterns from pessimistic and anxious to hopeful, focused, and calm. And in a very similar way, good sleep and good diet support positive mental states. So, an everyday attention to physical well-being is conducive of equanimity. In this way, simply being alive can be a reward in and of itself, as it creates an equanimous state of mind no matter what is happening. Right, second everyday practice is an intentional approach to information and media consumption. It's pretty common knowledge that we now live in an information crisis. It's a quagmire in which misinformation and disinformation compete for our attention. With deep fakes and bad actors, finding the truth in some ways is getting harder and harder. With rampant attacks on expertise, professional advice and institutions, people are increasingly doing their own research, which invariably means social media or podcasts such as this, the provenance and factual basis of which is hugely variable and unregulated. At its worst, all this leads to people living in increasingly polarised knowledge universes. And this polarisation is characterised by increasing rancour and bitterness towards the other side, hardly a path to equanimity. And the biggest driver of this knowledge crisis is outrage. One of the most validated findings in psychology is a thing called the negativity bias. This is the universal fact that the negative is much more salient to us than the positive. For clear evolutionary reasons, our survival depended on this bias. So, our attention's grabbed and transfixed by the negative and can be colonised by media that deliberately targets us. As they say, bad news sells and outrage multiplies followers. So what's the answer to all of this? Well, consume media intentionally. Because constant exposure to outrage-driven headlines and culture wars erodes equanimity, you need to curate your media diet. For most people, this means dramatically less doom scrolling and less time, if any, on X, let alone getting isolated in partisan echo chambers. Replace scrolling with a more deliberate consumption of uplifting content. Now, I was very hesitant to begin my social media project as I knew how destructive social media is generally for people's mental health. But there are great things there, oases of positive content, healthy messages, uplifting experiences. And I was persuaded that I could reach more people with hopefully uplifting and helpful psychological content. My friends and colleagues convinced me that Psychology to Live By could be one such place within social media that would contribute to a wider well-being. Another suggestion I'd make is to maybe read or watch more long-form journalism. This can include non-fiction, literature and fiction. Slowing down and going deeper facilitates a calmer physiology and mental state. And apart from learning more, this creates a less distracted experience. Remember, equanimity is a state of composed attention, not one of continuous distraction. So, balance your intake. Intentionally search for and share good news stories. Operate on platforms that are well moderated to reduce toxic feedback and comments. Psychological research into feedback has shown that we need, on average, to receive 3 times more positive than negative feedback just to keep our emotional balance. So this is a pretty good guide for our consumption of media. In general, I recommend only mixing with convivial people, so see if you can apply that maxim to your online experience. And a helpful question when consuming media is, does this inform me or inflame me? If the answer is the latter, change your focus of attention, switch it off, quieten down, read something of substance. Accept the guidance of objective reality. Now, despite exaggerated claims that we live in a post-fact world, there are actually clearly better or worse knowledge claims to pay attention to. Science matters. Literature matters. Truth matters more than they've ever mattered in human history. Don't hand your emotional balance to people who are not experts, are not professionals, or who are in it for their own aggrandizement. So read and pursue quality information so you can transcend memes and liberate your mind from clickbait and the outrage machine. Right, a third path to equanimity is to actively pursue purpose and the experience of awe. The ancient Greeks distinguished between two types of happiness, hedonic and eudaimonic. Now, in the modern world, we're very familiar with hedonic pleasure, such as food, sex, and sensual pleasures. Now, we should pursue these, of course, but the Greek philosophers recognised that you can have too much of a good thing, and that hardship and suffering is a normal part of life. So what they said is also required is a solid sense of meaning and purpose in life. Or as Friedrich Nietzsche put it, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And as I've suggested earlier, equanimity isn't about being passive or indifferent to the troubles in our world. It's about acting from a grounded place. Whether you're advocating for justice, protecting your community, or just voting in elections, knowing why you care helps you act calmly and powerfully. Seeing things from a larger context, viewing it from a distance, is conducive of equanimity. For example, if we zoom out the timescale historically, we'd recognise that on average, we've never had it so good in terms of relative peacefulness, diet, physical health, longevity, standard of living, technology, education, access to knowledge, and so on. This type of progress is very meaningful and does provide a sense of purpose to work towards, to both protect it and to nurture its continuous improvement. So, an important, perhaps life-changing book on this is in fact entitled Factfulness, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. Written by Anna Rosling Ronland, Hans Rosling and Ola Rosling, it empowers us to place world events, including climate change, nuclear threat, military conflicts and so on, in a context that doesn't disable us. I highly, highly recommend it. By contrast, when we obsess about what's wrong and how things could be catastrophic, we're all in danger of suffering from pre-traumatic stress disorder. No, that's not a real diagnosis, but perhaps one day it will be. But when we focus on our powerlessness, that's when we feel most separate from the world. And that is when we experience most profoundly our anxiety, depression, anger, loneliness, boredom, and meaninglessness. We could literally spend our entire lives doing this and thereby not really living and appreciating our life. Before you know it, it'll be gone. So equanimity provides a path through these states, not by denying or negating or skirting them, but by absorbing them into a larger, more diverse context. It helps us see the world with spacious awareness. And that is a world from which we feel less divided and more a part of as a larger reality. And this leads us to the experience of awe. Now, awe is the experience of profound connection. Dasher Keltner, in his wonderful book simply entitled Awe, defines awe as the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends one's current understanding of the world and often accompanied by a sense of mystery and wonder. It's an emotion triggered by encountering what he calls the 8 wonders of life, which include the moral beauty of others, nature, collective movement, art, music, spiritual experiences, big ideas, and the cycles of life and death. Awe is a self-transcendent emotion that connects us to mysterious things in the world, such as ecosystems and cultural groups. It can be found in everyday moments and is known to enhance well-being. It does this by reducing stress, improving physical health, and fostering a sense of connection and belonging. Simply by slowing down and aiming our attention at the awe-inspiring, be it a person, a flower, the night sky, landscapes, human courage, great art, the laughter of a child. Look, the list is actually endless. Doing these, we can experience awe every day. And that then motivates us to connect with others, appreciate the world around us, and make positive changes. It's a perfect antidote to these troubles of the world and reliably creates equanimity and inner peace. So finally, as deeply social creatures, equanimity is a natural product of positive social connection. Inner peace reliably follows the practices of prosociality, compassion, gratitude, and civility. And we're going to look at each of these in turn. Prosociality is basically acts of kindness towards others. A large research literature indicates that social giving, volunteer work, pro bono work and the like all create a sense of inner well-being and meaning for people. Although we may not be able to significantly alter global events as individuals, we can always contribute significantly to the needs in our community. So, deliberately connect with your community, especially those close to you, your family, friends, neighbours, local community groups, and look to make a difference. When you consider we evolved to live in tight-knit, smallish communities, it makes sense that our inner architecture rewards us for local acts of altruism and kindness. These provide unalloyed pleasure and strengthen our sense of meaning and purpose, as we discussed earlier. So my suggestion is to find a community of practice that grounds you. This could be a meditation group, a book club, a sporting team, a spiritual practice, journaling, or just friends who keep you level-headed. Remember, you're not designed to do life alone. In similar fashion, compassion, or acts imbued with an intention to alleviate suffering in others, not only makes others feel good, but are very uplifting for the giver. The raft of benefits for both parties is extensive. Lower stress, less inflammation, lower blood pressure and heart rate, lower muscle tension, and positive psychological states such as feeling connected, better problem solving, and calmer emotional balance. Now the trick is to develop compassion without attachment. And this speaks to the distinction between empathic identification versus compassion. Compassion is always a positive emotion. It's akin to love or affection, and so it's inherently uplifting. But if we're too empathetic, we can actually find the world too disturbing, too upsetting. So we should use empathy to provide a target for and as a guide for our compassion. So you shift from empathy to the much more positive state of compassion. This allows us to care deeply about others and the world without being consumed by anger, despair, or the need to control outcomes. You can be engaged without being consumed. Another path to equanimity is the practice of gratitude, which again shifts our attention to all the things that are right in the world. So a simple strategy is to have a gratitude diary to record 3 things each day you're grateful for. And it appears that small things are as effective as large ones to lift mood, increase happiness, reduce stress, improve sleep, and even boost physical health. Gratitude also enhances resilience. It strengthens social connections and fosters a more positive outlook on life. Remember the negativity bias? What gratitude practices do is even out the scoreboard. There's so many wonderful things happening every day if only we could notice them. And how else could we practice gratitude? Well, remembering to express thanks to others. Simply noticing and savouring positive experiences. And don't forget self-gratitude. To be more balanced, it's also appropriate to acknowledge one's own strengths and moral virtues and to be grateful for one's life. Be grateful for one's health and abilities and be grateful simply for the miracle of one's existence. And finally, a very relevant practice for equanimity, in contemporary life especially, is the practice of civility. Unfortunately, modern life's often characterised by more and more incivility, which refers to microaggressions such as rude, discourteous or disrespectful behaviour. It might mean being dismissive, ignoring others, interrupting, using a harsh tone, or making condescending remarks. It just makes everyone unhappy. On the other hand, civility, which is caretaking, respectful attention, politeness, this is a lubricant for social harmony. It's invaluable for dealing with differences and with opinions and positions we dislike. With civility, we can hate certain beliefs without hating the person. We can always treat people as we would wish to be treated. In broad terms, civilization is an ongoing achievement of civility. It needs to be nurtured and sustained. A particularly valuable feature of civility is that it creates a feedback loop. It's mutually reinforcing because we're hardwired by evolution to relax and feel things are okay when we're in harmonious connection with those around us. It elicits the better angels of people's nature, including our own. Civil dialogue with people with opposing views can actually build equanimity if the goal is understanding, not converting. It's like training in a gym. You build emotional resilience when you're exposed to different opinions without losing your centre of balance. So, to sum up, in this podcast series on maintaining composure in troubling times, we've focused on the very healthy mental state of equanimity, defined as the ability to maintain inner calm when the world around us is disturbing. This series began by exploring the nature and value of equanimity. And then we went into some detail to explain various psychological strategies, reframing our thinking, shifting our attention, mindfulness-based sacred pauses, and of course in this podcast, action-based and socially focused practices. We have only one life as far as we know, and we shouldn't waste it on rancour and distress. I encourage you to consciously and intentionally build your capacity for equanimity. It will make your life happier and the world a better place for those around you. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you'd like to know more, my website is www.drchris.life, and click on the Videos tab to find links to all my social media. And if you like the podcast, tell people that you like so they can like it too.